Hey, what's up guys? So I haven't made a video in a while because I got COVID, but I'm all better. And in this video, I want to show how we can create roots using reframe. So let's get into it.
Uncle, yeah.
So the first thing I want to do is create a reframe project, and I'm going to use line again to help me with that. And I'm going to add plus roots, and this will add Bidi and pushy, and plus 10x, and this will give us some 10x debug tools. So let's create our project. I'm just going to go line new reframe, I can spell, and I'm just going to call this project roots example, and I'm going to add plus roots and plus 10x. Once this project has been made, I'm going to open it in VS Code. So I'm just going to cd into roots example, open it in VS Code, and I'm going to run a REPL using Culver. And go Culver, start a project REPL. I'm going to build the app. Cool, so then we're going to connect to the app build, and I'm going to go to localhost 8280, go back. Once this build is compiled, then we should see something on our screen here. Awesome, so our build's completed. If we go back to our web page, refresh it, we should see hello from reframe. This is homepage, and go to about page. We should see the 10x debug tools. If you don't, press Control H. They might just be hidden. So what we can also see in the 10x debug tools is that on our subscriptions, we're subscribing to an active panel, and right now we're showing the home panel. And we're also subscribing to the name subscription, and it's returning reframe. So if we click on go to about page, we can see that we submit a navigate event with the about keyword, and then at some point we also set the active panel to about panel, and here we can see our subscriptions update, and we also see that our root updates here. So what I want to cover is just how this is happening, and then I want to create a users root where we can get a list of users, and then when we click on a user, we go to a specific user. So we'll pass through root params. So let's get started with that. If we go to Visual Studio Code, and then we go to our files, we go to source views.cljs, then we can see here's our home panel, and it's returning hiccup, and here it's subscribing to the name subscription. That's what we see is returning reframe. So here it's hello from reframe. And the go to about us page is dispatching that navigate event with the about keyword. And then we see that this is registered in a multi-method. If you don't know how multi-methods work, I have made a video on them, but essentially what this is doing is it's saying, here's a method called roots panels. When you call it with the home panel keyword, return this home panel function. So if we called this roots panels with home panel and execute that, cool, we are returning this. So let's just get rid of that. Cool, and here we see the main panel. So the main panel is what's being rendered on every page. In fact, if we return some hiccup here, I'm just going to say div, this is on every page. And then let's create another div, and that will render out our panels. Save this. Now we'll see this is on every page, So we can click back and forth. So main panel is always being returned. And then the root.panels decides what panel to render based on the active panel subscription, which we can see here is returning about panel, or if we go to home page, it's returning home panel. So let's have a look at how these navigate events work, because that's the real meat of the navigation. So when we go to dispatch, we dispatch this navigate event with the home keyword. And then we can see that we're returning a map here that has this navigate side effect, which uses our handler. And this fn trace just traces this function in 10x, but we're not going to look too much into that right now. But let's look at where this navigate handler is being created. So if you go to our roots.cljs, we can see that here we're registering that effect. So that's navigate, and that's calling the navigate function with our handler, which would either be the home keyword or the about keyword. But let's see how all the root mapping takes place. So at the top of the file, this is where we define our multi-method, and here we have a default multi-method. So if we call panels with like something that doesn't exist, it will return the default panel, which in this case is no panel found for this root. If we go back to our browser and we just type in like rubbish here, we should see no panel found for this root because no root is being returned. But let's just go back to home. And let's see. So here we see we're mapping roots. So /, so this is / with nothing in front of it, is being mapped to the home keyword. So if we put, let's say, home here, then this root now wouldn't work. But if we go / home, this would work. And go to about page, and go to home page should probably map to home now, which it does. But let's leave that as blank. So what's actually happening is we're using this navigate function, and then this navigate function is using pushy to update history. So it's updating our history with URL for the handler. So this is updating the location. So if we go URL for and pass through about, we can see that it's going to update our location with / about. And if we go URL for home, it's going to update the location with /. Then what's going to happen is this dispatch function is going to be called with the passed route. So if we pass /, we're going to get the handler home. And this is using Bidi to match the route. So it's matching that / and it's returning us the handler, which in this case is home. So if we just made this home1, evaluated this, then evaluated this again, it would return home1. But we want it to return home, so just reevaluate that. And then it's going to use this dispatch function to push this set active panel event with the active panel. And this panel here gets created using this function. So if we just look at how this works, this gets the handler from the passed route. So if we cut this here and we push it here and we run this, it'll return home panel. So this home panel is either going to be home panel, or if we have about, it's going to be about panel. And that's how we choose what panel to display. It sets the active panel, so let's go here, and it associates active panel in the DB with the active panel. So either the about panel or the home panel keyword. And then we subscribe to that event with our subs. We subscribe to active panel, and then in our main views here, we will subscribe to that active panel and then render the right panel. That's basically how the routing works. It seems complicated, but it's actually not that bad. You're just passing data around. I want to make a new route now that will show a list of users, and if you click on one, it will just show that specific user. So the first thing I want to do is add that list of users to our DB. So if you see when we start this page, we fire off an event called initialize DB. So let's find that event. So I'm just going to search for initialize DB. And here we can see in our events, there's an initialize DB event, and it returns our default DB. So let's go here to default DB. And if we update this, then we can update the initialize DB. So I'm just going to make a users key here, and that's going to be a vector of users. And each user will have an ID, say ID 1 and ID 2 and a name. So the first one will be name on the code again. And the second user will have the name of Gareth Cliff. Awesome. So if we go back to our page now, there's no page for home. Let's go to / again. And let's look at our DB. So I'm just going to click on effects here. And here we can see we have our users in our DB. So now I want to make a / users root, and this will list our users. So right now the page is not found, so let's create it. I'm going to go back to the routes.cljs, and here I'm going to make a root called users, and it's going to return the users index keyword. So let's just see what panel this users would expect. So we can actually just see that here. If we copy this function out, then we can go, we want to pass the root / users, and it will give us the keyword users index panel. So let's register a view that uses that users index panel. So I'm going to go here to my source directory, and I'm going to make a new folder here, and I'm going to call it users _ index. And inside of here, I'm going to make a file called views.cljs. Here, I'm going to create a new function called users index. This function is going to have a let binding, and we're going to subscribe to the users in our database. So the first thing we need to do is require reframe. So I'm going to go require, and then we need to require reframe.core, and I'm going to require this as reframe. And then we're going to subscribe to our users using a reframe / subscribe. And now we don't have the subscription yet. So let's create the subscription. So I'm going to go back to this folder. I'm going to create a new file called subs.cljs. And here I also need to include reframe. So I'm going to go require reframe.call as reframe. And I want to register a new subscription. So to register a new subscription, we just go reframe reg sub. And I'm going to name this users. And then this takes in a function which gets our DB. And then we don't use the second argument. And then all we want to do is return our users from the DB. So now in our view, we can subscribe to that subscription. So we're going to go, well, we have to require it here. So now here, I'm going to require from roots example user index.subs. And I'm going to require this as subs. We can go subs / users. And then inside of this let, I want to return a div. And the div will, let's say, have an h1. We'll give the h1 the name of user list. And underneath that, we'll render out our users. So we can map over our users. Then we want to go through each user and let's return a div with the name of the user. And just like React, we need to give this a key attribute. So we put attributes in a map here. And I'm just going to give this the key attribute. And this key attribute, we can just get the ID from the user. All these values are coming from here. So now if we go back, we also need to add this to our panels multi-method. We can get our panels from our roots file, which is here, roots.cljs. We need to access this panels multi-method and add a new panel to it. So copy this namespace, go back to views.cljs, paste this here, copy this. Let's copy it as roots. And then here we can go def method roots / panels. And then we want to register this as users index panel. We don't need any arguments. And then we want to return the users index. So now we have everything in place for this view to work. But if we refresh this page, nothing's going to work. And that's because we're not actually including this namespace anywhere. So we need this namespace to actually execute when we start our app. So the way to do that is by copying the views file. And I'm just going to go to core.cljs because I know everything starts up in core. Here's where we actually start up our app with this init function. So let's include this. And that's all we need. And if we go back here, we have our users list, but we're not returning any users. So let's see what's going on there. I'll go back to views.cljs. Okay, I can see what's going on. We're passing through user, but we're trying to get the name out of users here. That's not going to work. We need to get the name out of our user. Save this. Go back. Cool. Okay. Now we have the names of our users, but now I want to click them to actually go to a user. So I want to go to users 1 or users 2. So let's go back and see how we can make that happen. So if we go to our roots.cljs file, we need to now make a route that we're able to get the ID from the path. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to, instead of having this user's index here, I'm going to add a map. And then I'm going to say if it's blank, then I want to return user's index. Otherwise, if the route is made out of, so I'm putting a vector here, / and then a variable, which I'm just calling ID now, then I want you to return user view. So now if we save this and let's pass / users / 1, we're getting a root param with the ID of 1. And if we update this to 2, we can see we're getting a root param and the ID is 2. And the handler it's returning is users view. But if we go / users again, we'll still get users index and our other routes will still work. Cool, so we can see that we're returning users. If nothing follows users, then return user index. Otherwise, if we have / and then another path param, which we're naming ID, then return the user view. Awesome. So let's actually implement this now. So I'm going to create another folder in source, new folder, and I'm going to call this user_view. And I'm going to create a new file here called views.cljs. And here I want to return a user view function. What I'm going to do is I want to get a specific user from the database. So I'm going to go let, and I'm going to get user, and I'm going to subscribe to a specific user. So I'm going to need reframe again, require reframe. So require reframe.core as reframe. And here I'm just going to dereference it right there, and I go reframe /subscribe. And I'm going to go user and pass through an ID. We don't have the ID yet, so let's just hard code this to 1. And then I'm going to just return a div, and this is just going to return a string with the selected user is, and I'm just going to grab the name from our user. Cool, and while we're at it, we might as well register this panel. So we need to require our roots. So require from roots example.roots. I'm just going to require this as roots. And then we're going to def method, and we need to get from our roots /panels. We want to call this user view panel, and doesn't take any arguments, and returns the user view. Cool, so let's just revise how we get this user view panel. We go to our roots file, and this dispatch is going to get our root and then dispatch which panel we have selected. So if we go here, this is going to get the result of pass, and we're going to pass /users/1, and then it's going to return user view panel. So we go back, and user view panel is what we're using here. So let's just make this subscription. So I'm going to create a new file here called subs.cljs. Here we need to require reframe. So just require reframe.core as reframe. And we want to register a new subscription. So we'll go reframe /reg sub. And I want to call this subscription user. And then this takes in a function, and we'll have our DB here. And then we need to get the ID from the subscription. So we destructure it here in a vector. This first value we're not going to need. This first value is just the name of the subscription. So it's going to be this. So we don't need that, but we do need the user ID. And then we need to filter our users. So we just go filter, and then we'll filter through our users. So we'll get a user U, and we need to make sure that the ID of our user U is equal to the user ID we passed in. Here we just need to loop over the users in our DB. So I'm just going to grab users from our DB, and then we need to just grab the first one. So I'm just going to go first. Cool, so let's just break this function down a bit to explain it. So this filter is going to take in a list of users. So this here will be a list of users. Let's say ID and is 1. The name is Todd. And that's in a list. And we can just pass through 1 here, and it will return the first one that it finds. So it's going to get the ID from this value. And if it doesn't get found, it's just going to return null. So if we change the ID to 2, it's going to return null. Cool, so that's our subscription. Cool, but now we still don't actually have this ID, but let's just see if this works. We're going to go here, and let's go /users/1. No panel is found for this root, and that's because we didn't actually include this root in our core. So I'm just going to copy the namespace, go to core.cljs, and just require this root here. Go back. So it's still not working, but let's see why. Let's check our console. No subscription handler registered for our user root. Okay, so it's returning a null subscription. So it can't see our subscription. Let's just see why. We go to view, reframe subscribe user, and that's because this is a namespace key within our namespace. We need to use the key from our subscription. So let's go roots, example, user view.subs, and I'm just going to return this as subs, and then we can go subs/user, save this, go back, and then the selected user is on the code again. But this won't change with our ID like we want it to change. It'll only change if we change the value here. The selected user is Gareth Cliff. So we need to grab this value from our root param. So let's start doing that. I'm just going to close our console. So we're going to go to our roots file, and we saw earlier that if we pass our root, so I'm just going to pass our root, which is /users/1, we get these root params here, but we're only setting the active panel here. So let's actually, instead of setting the active panel, let's set the whole root with the active panel. So I'm going to, instead of using this dispatch, I'm going to create a new dispatch. So I'm just going to comment this out. We want to create a new dispatch, and we'll call this events, let's say set root, and we'll set the whole root, which will be this value. So we'll have root params and the handler, and let's actually just put this in a map. We'll say the root value is root, and then we'll make the panel value the panel. So let's now create this event. So we can go to our events. I'm just going to copy this set active panel, make this keyword here set active root. Well, set root, I think is what we used. Here, what we'll get is we'll get the root data, and we'll associate active, well, let's just associate root with root. And if we go back to our project, then we refresh this, we'll see that we have now a root key in our database, and it contains the root params as well as the panel. So now we need to subscribe to this root. So let's create a new subscription, and the active panel subscription can change. So instead of getting the active panel from the DB, let's get in DB, and we want to get in root and then panel. Save this, go back, refresh this page, and then we see we're getting that right active panel again. So what this is doing is we have an object in our database where it's root, then there's a map, and then there's a panel, home panel. And to grab this value, we use the getIn function. Here we pass through the map, and then we can pass through a vector with the keys drilling down to where we want to go. So we want to go first to root and then to panel. And if we return that, it'll return this home panel keyword. So it'll return any value that we put here. So value returns the value. Cool, so now we have our active panel working, but we still need to be able to get our root params. So I'm going to create a new subscription here, and I'm going to subscribe to root params. And then here we want to get from our root, I want to get root params. So inside root, I want to get in root again, I want to get the root params. Now that we can subscribe to the root params, let's use them in our user view. So in our views, I'm going to go here and I want to get root params, and I'm just going to dereference it from a reframe subscription, subscribe, and I want to get, okay, now we have a conflict. So now I need this subscription, but I'm already subscribing to this subscription. So I'm just going to require it with a different name. So let's go here from root.example.subs. I'm going to require this as, let's say, root subs. And then from root subs, I want to get the root params. So now these root params should be returning a map where we have the ID of the value of the root. So instead of passing through 2 here, I'm going to get the ID from root params. So let's save this, refresh this page. Cool, and now we can see that we are subscribing, but we're using the string and not the integer 2. So here we can see it's a string value because of the quotes, and we don't get a selected user. So let's, in our subscription, make sure that we update this user ID. Let's wrap it with the int function to convert the string to an int. Cool, so now that we force user ID to be an int, cool, it's working. So we refresh, we can go, the selected user is Gareth Cliff. If we go to users 1, then the selected user is on the code again. But now we still haven't linked from our users list. I want to be able to click on these and go to the specific user. So let's do that. So I'm just going to go back to views.cljs and I'm going to copy this onClick function that routes us to home. And then I'm going to go back to users index views.cljs and I'm going to add this onClick event to our div. And then we also need to just include this events namespace. So let's go routes.example.events as events. And now what should happen is these guys should just take us home. So yeah, they take us home, but we don't want that. What I would prefer is if these guys could navigate us to the right route. So if we go back to our routes.cljs file, let's go to this URL4 handler. So if we remember, if we go URL4 and pass through home, it will give us our home route. But now how do we get our route for users? So if I go users view, it's going to cause an exception. And that's because I need to pass through an ID and the value of the ID. And now it will return the right route. So we need to update our URL4 to be able to take multiple arguments. And the way we can do that is if we wrap this in a vector and then call this using apply, it will then flatten these arguments out like so and call URL4 like this. That's what apply does. So I'm going to update this to use apply. And then what I'm going to do is everywhere where we dispatch navigate, I'm going to then call this with a vector. So here we're going to call this with a vector. Here we're going to call this with a vector. And if we save this and we go back home, so we can click on one of these guys to go home. Okay, this won't work because here we need to actually also call this with a vector. Save this, and now this should work. Cool, so just to make clear what we just did, if you go to routes here, we are passing in, instead of home, we're going to be passing through home like this. And that's going to be calling URL4 with each of the arguments within this vector. Undo that. And now we can go to our user index views. And instead of home, we want our user view. And we want to pass through the ID. And the ID will be the ID of our user. So let's just grab the ID from our user, save this. And now if we go to /users, we can click one of these guys and then we can get the selected user is on the code again. If we go back, click on Gareth Cliff, the selected user is Gareth Cliff. And that's that. This has been a very long video. I hope you've learned something. I have lots more coming up. Alan and I have another thing planned for CruxDB, a more advanced tutorial there. And I've just got a lot of smaller tutorials along the way. So if you like this one, please subscribe or like the video. Cheers. Thanks. Bye.